My name's John Kerr. I'm here on behalf of the Rail and Maritime Transport Union's National Office and also on behalf of our Littleton Port branch. I see that I've been allocated time for both of our submissions. You'll be relieved to hear that I don't intend to take up the full amount of time, nor do I intend to talk to you about bus stops and car parks. I'm here to talk about a matter that is quite literally one of life and death for our members, some of whom are sat behind me and have come to support their union in making our submission. And that is around proposed asset sales and the prospect of the privatisation of our port. Our experience as a union has been that this sort of sell-off is disastrous from the perspective of the health and safety of our members. And in particular, our experience in rail during the 1990s was a very, very sad one. Between 1995 and 2000, as privatisation occurred in rail, health and safety became less and less of a priority, and profit began to drive more and more of the decisions that were taken. And the result was that there were 11 deaths in that period of rail workers. And we only really started to turn that around after the ministerial inquiry in 2000 and the eventual renationalisation of rail. In the port sector, the most private port in New Zealand is the Port of Tauranga, and by any one of a number of measures, the Port of Tauranga has the worst health and safety record in New Zealand. We're not saying that Littleton Port's management couldn't do better. We're not saying that our port couldn't be run more efficiently. We're not saying that we can't make productivity gains. We're not saying that it can't be run more profitably. Our union's just come out of a major dispute where one of the key bones of contention was a refusal by management to engage with us on matters like productivity. We've concluded that dispute, and the relationship between the unions at LPC and management are on a different footing, we like to think, and we're making immense strides in that direction. We're urging you and we're pleading with you as councillors not to sell off the port. Our submissions cover off some of our objections to asset sales in general. Those are philosophical objections. There is reasoning behind those. I think that my colleagues from Unions Canterbury have canvassed that, those arguments, and I don't propose to rehearse them here. The message that I wanted to give to you as a council today from our union is that this is a matter of life and death for our members. We will campaign against any sell-off of the port, and we are a campaigning union. We are a union that prides itself on our ability to get the message to the public. We don't think there has been sufficient consultation or sufficient democratic engagement around the issue of asset sales, and we strongly urge the council to forego that option. Naturally, the question would then arise, what else do you do? Again, I think that other submitters have covered off that ground. Clearly, it's a difficult question. It's a complex question. One of the ironies is that one of the submission from the employers and manufacturers, much of which I agreed with except the conclusion. So I'm sure that that's something that we really do have to pool and put our minds together. But from the perspective of our members, our concern is health and safety on the waterfront. I brought a couple of copies of a book that our union published last year, and I brought this as a gift to you, Madam Mayor, and also for the Chair of the Finance Committee. So I'll leave that there. And that just outlines the events in rail in that period that I've spoken to.
Thank you. you haven't been warned about calling me Madam Mayor, obviously, but anyway. I wanted to kind of start off with, because I'm surprised. I hadn't realised that Port of Tauranga had a worse health and safety record than our own Littleton Port. I would like to have some detail on that. Sure. Because I thought that you would be making a submission about how bad it is at Littleton at the moment. Yeah, it's not good, and it's had a very unhappy history. But Port of Tauranga, and there's a number of ways which you can measure port safety. But you've had people die. And Port of Tauranga have had people die too. One of the things is it doesn't get reported against Port of Tauranga because what they've done is they've contracted out stevedoring and marshalling and things like that. So often the deaths and injuries don't come up as against Port of Tauranga. They say we're just the landlord, we're just clipping the ticket. And you may well remember there was an interview on Morning Report last November with the corporate affairs manager, which has gone down in Radio New Zealand as the disaster interview, where that particular corporate affairs manager tried to abdicate responsibility for health and safety on the waterfront. That's the sort of thing that happens when you privatise ports. Okay, so I'll look forward to receiving that information. The issue that we have at the moment, and I guess what why we're looking at the port at the moment, is what's happened between Tauranga and Timaru. Yeah. So we may end up in a situation where the asset that the people of Christchurch own will diminish in value unless we look to other parts of New Zealand in terms of our own port. So what we do need is a national port strategy, and that's not something that this forum is going to be in a position to implement. I mean, it's quite clear that in a country of 4.5 million people with 11 blue water ports that something has to give. And the industry is restructuring itself. And Littleton Port Management admitted that they were caught with their pants down by the Port of Tauranga deal. That's not to say, though... Well, no, they were approached by Port of Tauranga first. Au contraire, the finance manager at LPC met with us and stated quite clearly it was the Silver Fern Farms Fonterra deal that caught them out. Yeah, no, that's so right. That established the grounds for... But they were certainly approached by Port of Tauranga before. But at that time they didn't know that Port of Tauranga was talking to Fonterra. So that's what caught them out. Look, we're not saying that Littleton Port can't be managed better. We're not saying it doesn't face challenges. We're not saying that it's got all sorts of issues that need addressing. However, it is still and will continue to be, for the foreseeable future, a major gateway in and out of our region. And management have taken some enlightened steps in looking at an inland port out at Ralston, which will give them some access to a greater hinterland. So it's already a Port of Tauranga one. Just opposite. Just opposite. Correct. Yeah. It's really, you know, I mean, all I'm saying is that the one thing that I think we're going to also have to take into account is whether we're going to have an asset of the value that it is today in the future. And that is an element of a conversation that I think we do need to have. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yep. Yanni.
Obviously, some of us are worried about selling off any of the asset, but in the consultation document, the council's seeking permission to sell off everything, 100%, through to a little bit. Yeah. So, in I guess a worst case scenario for your union in terms of the submission, if we needed to raise capital through asset sales, is there a bottom line you would have in terms of the port? You know, 66%, 75%, 51% in terms of strategic ownership?
I think once you start to sell any portion of it, you put your foot on a very, very slippery slope. And we'd be very reluctant to accede to the sale of any part of the port.
Even though we bought some of it back.
Yeah, well, we applauded that.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, well done. keep it.
We brought it back for a reason. Anyway.
You made the comment that a national port strategy wasn't probably part of this process, but given that the number of submitters are raising with us the relationship with central government and seeking a renegotiation with the cost share, it seems to me an incredibly sensible suggestion in terms of the future of ports in New Zealand, that we should be proactive as a council in raising with government. Is that?
Yeah, we'd endorse that. I mean, we think it makes sense for ratepayers, because if you look around the country, for ratepayers around the country, also for New Zealand business and for New Zealand workers, that we have a national port strategy. I mean, historically, any major infrastructure in New Zealand has been put there by the state. You've only got to look at the history of 19th century New Zealand to see that.
The only reason that Christchurch City Council owns the port is because there are two in the region. Tauranga is owned 56% by its region. Paul?
I thought it was so you could get a return on the investment.
No, it was because it was in the region. The regions took over the ports.
Yeah, but
they did. The regions took over the port. Yeah. They couldn't give the port of Littleton to Canterbury Regional Council because there was another one in Timaru, so they distribute them to the council. So that's the only reason the Christchurch City Council owns the Port of Littleton. Paul?
I'm sorry, I thought that was the reason why it came to own the port. I thought the reason why it still owns the port is that it provides a return on capital.
Not at the moment. Not really.
My question's around, I'm not saying that we don't need a New Zealand-wide strategy to rationalise the amount of ports we have that move freight up and down the country. The question is if you do a rationalisation of the ports and Littleton Port is deemed to be the one that is rationalised out of the freight movement, that would decimate the value of that port. So it's a risk. But what would you say to that if that's what came out of a rationalisation of ports? I think
that we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Our analysis is that Littleton, given its position in relationship to the major economic centre in Canterbury, it's very difficult to make a case to rationalise Littleton out of any national port strategy.
Okay, thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
It's good to hear from you.
I'll leave those there.
Yeah, no, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for making me and Raf special in your life.